A young man once wandered the streets of Petersburg so lonely and so starved for real connection that he stepped into a church one evening simply to feel less alone, and there he saw a woman whose face seemed to hold an entire unspoken history behind it. I called him Ordinov, and the woman was Katerina, and the man beside her, an old, watchful figure named Murin, everyone assumed was her husband. He was something closer to her keeper, and by the time Ordinov had maneuvered his way into a room inside their strange, tense household, he had also stepped into a story far darker than any lonely scholar could have anticipated. Katerina was beautiful and fragile, and prone to fits of confession that arrived in fragments, half delirium and half memory, and slowly, piece by piece, Ordinov began to understand why she could never quite meet his eyes without a flicker of guilt passing behind them. The story she eventually reveals, in broken pieces across long, feverish nights, is this. Murin was not always simply her guardian. He had once been her mother's lover, and there are strong intimations, never fully confirmed, but never quite denied either, that Murin was responsible for the death of Katerina's own father, clearing the way for himself and her mother to be together. And more disturbing still, Katerina's own fiancé, a young man she once genuinely loved, also died under circumstances that trace back, in some unspoken way, to Murin's presence in her life, as though every man who ever tried to claim her love outright was somehow removed from the picture before he could succeed. Katerina carries all of this not as settled history, but as a low, constant hum of unprocessed guilt, because she has never once asked herself plainly what actually happened, what her own role in it might have been, and why, despite every reason to run from Murin, she has instead spent years unable to leave his side. On the surface, this looks like fear. Murin is controlling, watchful, possessive in ways that would frighten anyone. But underneath the fear is something more complicated, a magnetic pull she cannot fully explain even to herself, and that pull is not really about Murin at all. It is about everything she has never let herself face. Murin is simply the one living link to her father's death, her fiancé's death, her mother's ruin, and staying near him, however dangerous, means never having to stand alone with the full weight of what actually happened. Ordinov, watching all of this unfold, becomes convinced that love alone can free her, that if he simply loves her enough, she will finally be able to walk away from Murin and step into a different life. But Ordinov's love, however sincere, cannot do the one thing Katerina actually needs done. He cannot face her trauma for her. He can only offer her a doorway out, and a doorway is useless to someone who has never allowed herself to look directly at what she is running from. Katerina wavers between the two men, drawn toward Ordinov's warmth and pulled back toward Murin's dark familiarity, and this oscillation is not a simple failure of will. It is what happens to a person who has built her entire sense of self around an unexamined wound. Leaving Murin would mean confronting the possibility that she played some part in her father's death, that her fiancé died because of choices connected to her own family's darkness, that the story she has told herself about being merely a victim might be more complicated than she can bear to examine. Staying with Murin, however suffocating, lets her avoid that reckoning indefinitely, because as long as the wound stays wrapped inside their strange, unspoken arrangement, she never actually has to open it and look inside. There is a scene where Katerina, drinking wine with Murin at his own insistence, grows suddenly desperate to know her own future, pressing him for answers the way a person presses an old wound to see if it still aches. Murin, half taunting and half indulgent, offers her nothing solid, only riddles and warnings, and Ordinov watches, understanding on some level that he is witnessing the actual mechanism of her captivity. It is not chains, It is a woman returning again and again to the one source that might finally explain her own past to her, even though that source has never once given her a straight answer, because the not knowing has become more bearable than a clear answer might be. If Murin confirmed her worst fears, she would have to live with certainty instead of fog, and certainty in matters this dark can feel far heavier than doubt. So she keeps asking, and he keeps deflecting, and each performance of the question renews the very bond it claims to be trying to escape. There are nights when Katerina seems almost ready to leave with Ordinov and never look back. And then Murin's voice sounds from another room, or his shadow crosses a doorway, and something in her simply closes again, retreating into the old fog, because the fog, however suffocating, is the only shelter she has ever built against the full weight of what she suspects about her own past. I think about how often this exact pattern shows up far outside the Gothic edges of this particular story, because most people are not living with a Murin, a literal sinister figure tied to actual deaths in their past. But many people are living with a quieter version of the same mechanism, staying bound to relationships or situations that echo some old, unresolved pain, not because those situations make them happy, but because the familiar shape of an old wound feels safer than the uncertainty of finally healing it. A person who was never allowed to grieve a loss properly may find themselves circling relationships that recreate the shape of that loss again and again. A person who never processed the guilt of some earlier failure may keep choosing partners who let them quietly punish themselves without ever naming what they are actually punishing themselves for. The trauma does not need to announce itself directly. It simply sits underneath every choice, steering a person back toward whatever feels like unfinished business, because unfinished business, however painful, at least feels familiar. I have watched this same mechanism at work in people who keep returning to relationships that recreate a parent's coldness, or a childhood home's instability, or a betrayal they never got to properly confront. And in every case, the pull feels, from the inside, like something closer to destiny than to habit. It rarely announces itself as avoidance. It dresses itself up as chemistry, as fate, as a bond too strong to simply walk away from, when the plainer truth underneath is usually that walking away would mean finally facing something the person has spent years arranging their whole life around never having to face. Katerina's story does not resolve into a clean rescue. Ordinov's love is real, but it cannot substitute for the harder, more private work Katerina alone can do, which is finally sitting with what happened to her and what she has spent years avoiding by staying close to the one man who represents all of it at once. By the story's end, Ordinov begins to understand that he was never actually capable of rescuing her, because rescue was never the thing this situation could offer. Only she could do the work required, and she was not yet ready to do it. This is, I think, the hardest truth the story has to offer. Anyone who has ever loved a person carrying an unfaced wound. You cannot love someone out of a trauma they have not yet agreed to look at themselves. You can stand at the doorway, holding it open, offering warmth and every reason in the world to finally step through it. But the walking through has to belong to them, and no amount of devotion on your part can substitute for the moment they choose, on their own, to stop circling the wound and finally face it directly. I want you to ask yourself honestly whether there is a Murin in your own life, not a literal dangerous figure necessarily, but a relationship, a habit, a place you keep returning to that seems to trap you precisely because it lets you avoid facing something you have never fully processed. The pull you feel toward it may not be love in any straightforward sense. It may simply be the gravity of unfinished grief, unexamined guilt, or a wound so old you have stopped recognizing it as a wound at all, mistaking its familiar weight for something closer to fate. Katerina calls her bond with Murin unavoidable, almost supernatural, as though some dark destiny had assigned the two of them to each other. But destiny is rarely the honest word for what keeps a person circling the same old pain. The honest word is usually avoidance, dressed up as something too large to resist, when in fact it is simply the quiet, patient work of a trauma that has never once been faced directly, waiting for the person carrying it to finally stop circling and look straight at what it has been trying to show them all along. Perhaps the most useful question this story leaves behind is not what happened to Katerina, but what has happened to you, quietly waiting in the corner of your own life for the day you finally stop circling and look straight at it instead.